To most football followers, Mike Fitzpatrick has been the sombre face of the AFL Commission for the past 10 years. To those of us whose memories go back 40 years, we remember the young Fitzpatrick as a driving force in Carlton's 3 premierships in the late 70s and early 80s. Along the way, he studied at Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship, started what has become a billion-dollar investment business, and headed both the AFL and the Australian Sports Commission. Welcome, Mike. You've wasted neither your time nor your talent.
Thanks very much, Michael. It's an honour to be here.
An honour?
An honour.
Wow. We'll get to the meatier subject shortly. But why were you so earnest in your role as the Commission Chairman? I remember thinking at home, watching you one night at the Brownlow function, and I thought there's a bit of Vladimir Putin about you. The dark suit, the white shirt, the tie, and the earnest look.
I don't think it was deliberately so, but I think you've got a... Chairmanship of the AFL is an important position. I think, particularly initially when I had Andrew there, I think we needed a contrast.
So he's the funny man.
I was the straight man.
Yeah, but you is the Fitzpatrick we see publicly? Is that you, or are you different in private? In
many of the cases, in presenting things for the AFL, you're presenting something that's pretty much a set piece where the Commission's made a decision. And you've got to be very clear about what the decision is. And there's not a huge amount of room for humour in all that. So I think away from the televised side of it and the public eye side of it, there's plenty of room for humour and enjoyment.
So I've heard.
But in terms of those sort of the formal presentations, well, that's what they are. There's a role to be played. You're playing the role.
You're only recently retired. Are you missing it?
You always miss it. You know, I am missing it a bit. I think you just miss the passion that people have for it. Not just the players, but the presidents and the chief executives, everybody involved in the AFL. They're there because they love it, and you miss that. In general business, you don't have that.
Let's talk about the footy first. I know that's your preference anyway. 3 premierships, 2 as captain. Mm-hmm. You had a great run, didn't you? You came to Carlton in '75, and you couldn't have made a better choice.
No, it was a great choice for me. I really enjoyed the company of those players. They were a very confident group. When I got there in '75, I immediately struck up a good friendship with Perce Jones. And
you're an odd couple, you two.
Yeah, we are an odd couple, but we're good mates. And it was just a terrific side. And I learned a lot from the older players and the young players that came in, particularly in '81, '82. The young players that came through were just added that bit of zest to what was already a pretty good team.
There you and Parko are holding up one of the most cherished prizes in sport in Australia.
I think that's the '81.
'81. You were pretty good in '81.
Had a good game in '81.
Yeah.
I was probably
playing in the ruck,
fortunate that Peter Moore had a hamstring, and so started at full forward and didn't get in the midfield much during the day, only late in the game. So that was helpful because a terrific player and would have, fit would have been a challenge.
In '82, you played centre half forward.
Yeah, most of the game was centre half forward. Kick too.
Yes, I'll get to that. I remember you saying once that I said to you, you should have one of Norm Smith, and you said no. I should have won 2 Norm Smith.
Well, I was only joking.
No, you weren't. One of the bravest decisions from any player that I've been involved with in my time covering football was your decision after 1 year at Carlton, at 23 years of age, to take up the Rhodes Scholarship and go to England. Was there ever a battle in your mind about whether you should do that or not?
There was a battle, but that battle was more about applying for it in the first place. I was getting towards the end of an engineering degree, and I was under a bit of pressure to put the application in for a variety of reasons. And I could see that if I got it, was probably I wouldn't get to play VFL. So it was quite a hard choice, but I decided to do it. But then when I got it, I could just see the whole Victorian experience falling away. But fortunately, Carlton were prepared to, and actually, to be fair, Richmond and North at the same time were prepared to essentially just take me on for a year. And Carlton were prepared to actually give me some assurance beyond that. So I sort of preferred the Carlton offer anyway, and I preferred Carlton as a group. And with my father's sort of blessing, that was the decision we made. And it was a good decision.
So you arrived in Melbourne at 22. You'd played nearly 100 games with Subiaco.
Yep.
Here at 22, decided to go to England at 23, and it virtually cost you 3 years of your career, correct?
It did. It cost me sort of 2 years. Carlton knew that at the end of October 75, I'd go to Oxford. They started to ring up about March, see if I'd come back, because the academic year finished in June, mid-June. So I did come back in mid-June. And actually it was quite an interesting experience because I was pretty fit. I'd been rowing, been running around, obviously, in the English summer. And in general, the Carlton players were sort of in that mid-season slump where they were tired, grounds were wet, weather was unpleasant. And so I actually came back and I was able to play pretty well for 8 or 9 weeks, but got to the finals and sort of I started to run out of gas as they were coming through. So we ended up losing by a point to North at Waverley in the prelim. It was a game we should have won and a flag we should have won.
So you missed, was it 77 that you...
Missed 77
Yeah, the entire season?
Yeah.
78, you played 2 games.
Yeah,
Explain that to me.
Came back, having done exams, I wasn't in the same sort of same sort of shape I was in 76, and I'd been out of the game for 2 years. So I got a game in the twos, I think out at Windy Hill. Then played 2 games. The first one, I think they put me in the back pocket, which was not my natural position. And then the next week we played Collingwood, which was a big game. And I misjudged my travel to the ground. I ended up being 5 minutes late for Jez's speech, which was pretty much fatal.
Not game day, you're talking about during the week?
Game day.
Oh, game day?
Game day.
Okay.
So I remember when I finally got through the traffic, I totally misjudged it because the traffic was, and I was in a borrowed car. I should have left the car. But anyway, I ended up in the car park and Keith McKenzie was out looking for me. And he sort of hurried me in and said, you know, you're in strife here. And so Jez basically said, you're not here on time, not interested, you're out.
Wow.
So I sat on the bench, came on about half time. I think stats were like 12 kicks in the second half. Didn't do any good, didn't play again that season.
Geez, he was a tough taskmaster.
It was tough. No, it was tough, and it was not an unfair decision, to be fair. And I think, I'm not quite sure, I think Lofsy tried to sell me over the summer, but because of the contract I had...
Tried to sell you? Did he? True?
I think they and North were interested. So I think what happened though was because the question was asked, but the way the contract worked, I had the option to stay, so I stayed.
Were you aware that they were doing
No,
things behind the scenes?
Yeah. It was put to me.
That would have pricked your pride, wouldn't it?
It was put to me. It did, but it sort of wound me up a bit too.
Did it?
Yep.
So 79, 81 and 82 were the flags.
Yep.
It was an amazing period, wasn't it? I mean, to win 3 flags in 4 years.
Yep.
Jezza leaves after the 79 flag.
After 79, yeah.
Yeah. You need a new... he was captain coach of that team that won the flag.
Yep.
You need a new coach and a new captain. Perce Jones becomes coach and you become the captain in 1980.
Correct.
Yeah. You were an outstanding team in 80, but fell apart in the finals and Jones lost his job, correct?
Out in straight sets.
Yeah. Was he unfairly treated, Perce?
It's a bit hard to say. I think he knew footy inside out. He struggled in the end to have real authority, and you know, as the year went on, we just started to have the odd issue with the odd player, you know, drinking on say a Thursday night or something like that.
There's your mate. He looks 6 inches taller than you there.
Yeah, he's on a high chair.
So in comes David Parkin as coach. What are your early memories of Parker?
Parker was interesting in that the discipline aspect fell away. I mean, he was right on top of them, and that was the major change, I think. But also because of the scientific background he had in phys ed, just the way in which he trained us, the variety, the intensity with which training worked, was a bit different to what we'd had. What we'd had was lots of long one exercise sessions that might go for, say, 2 hours with Jezza and with Perce. And we were suddenly getting, you know, 10-minute exercise here, 20 over there, much more variety, but the intensity meant that you got very fit pretty quickly. And then there was very much the Hawthorn aspect of how you play the game and the chasing, the tackling, the lack of skill.
You love that.
Because a lot of the Carlton supporters kept saying, "Oh, he's de-skilling us. You know, we've got a problem." but I actually, you know, the way in which he thought through not just the preparation, but the way in which he thought through other sides was impressive.
Richard Goyder, who replaced you as the AFL Commission Chairman, said of you, "Mike's chairmanship will be remembered for his capacity to demand improvement and innovation while protecting the traditions and history of the game." Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I think that's probably more than fair. Yeah,
but when you took office in 2007, you then said that the Commission hadn't been brave enough.
Yep.
Now, you obviously weren't talking about dismantling traditions, but being a bit more adventurous in their planning.
Yeah, look, when I got in, I thought we didn't really understand the clubs particularly well. And I felt in terms of being the #1 sport in Australia, we're at risk because our presence in the north, where half the media spend is, half the population is, you know, we were the 3rd or 4th sport, and arguably we still are. But I think we've made some real inroads into that. So my view was we had to, if we wanted to stay the #1 sport in Australia,
or become the #1 sport.
No, we were the #1 sport. But if we wanted to become clearly and definitely, by a long way, the #1 sport, we had to start investing, and we had to start investing in the north because that's where everything is. And I think, in terms of, I mean, there's a certain amount of criticism about the cost of the expansion of the 2 clubs in the north, but when you look at the $2.6 billion media rights deal, that's where the money came from. The money came from the fact we are the #1 national code by a street. And not only the AFL but also the clubs can attract national sponsorship, which is something they struggled to do before that.
So the inclusion of Gold Coast and GWS, you're happy with the way that's unfolded?
Yeah, I think it's easily already paid for itself.
Really?
Yeah.
In the broadcast rights?
In terms of broadcast rights, because we are clearly the national code.
I want to ask you about one player. Buddy Franklin went to Sydney from Hawthorn.
Correct.
You were hell-bent on getting him to GWS, correct?
Not hell-bent, but I was keen on that. I thought that would, in the same way as, say, having Tony Lockett at the Swans, I felt he could have a similar effect and really kickstart GWS. But if he'd wanted to go to another Victorian club or whatever, that wouldn't have particularly worried me.
But Sydney's probably the most important franchise in the country.
Sure.
In my view.
No, I agree.
So why were you so angry when the Swans cleverly negotiated the situation where he went to Sydney?
I was unhappy only in that I had been probably the last defender of Collar. And so I felt...
That's the cost of living allowance,
that
the Swans had.
That the Swans had. And I was reliably told for many years that this was simply to look after the journeymen and the young players. But, you know, increasingly became obvious with both the Tippett acquisition and then Buddy that that wasn't the case. And I was very disappointed in that. So
you're saying the Swans manipulated the Kohler agreement?
I'm not saying anything.
Well, that's
you're saying that.
Well, that's what I've interpreted you as saying.
Whatever, they ended up with the best 2 players in 2 years in a row that were on the market, and so I felt I had to have a discussion with them.
Were you embarrassed when you realised that you hadn't got your way?
No.
You weren't?
No. I mean, you're disappointed, but you're not embarrassed.
Why then did you have such an animated conversation with Swans chairman Richard Collis?
I think you should every now and then put a marker down.
A marker. Did you call him the word that we regard as the most offensive in the vernacular?
I don't think so, but he seems to have taped it, so we should be able to play that.
Yeah. Which if in fact that happened, that would indicate that you were more than disappointed, that you were angered.
Oh yeah, I was angry. Yeah, that's fair to say I was angry. Yeah, I'm not. It was but it was also a discussion that it wasn't done just off the top of my head.
What, the conversation?
Yeah, I was going to tell him, and I thought about it, and I thought about what I'd say.
But you haven't convinced me as to why you were so disappointed that one of the northern markets was going to be further...
No, I was comfortable about that. I was comfortable about... The fact he was at the Swans was not a bad thing as far as the overall game goes. It just meant that the GWS would take longer, that's all.
So the strategy was right? You got no
strategy was right.
Okay.
I don't think we executed perfectly, but not bad.
No, they're complex issues. Talking about complex issues, what about the Essendon supplement saga? Easy looking back, would you have done anything differently?
Fundamentally not, I don't think. It was, it was a disappointing part of footy. Shouldn't have happened. Duty of care, player welfare, just, something happened at Essendon that shouldn't have happened.
Talking about duty of care and player welfare, were you blokes involved as much as you should have been? You as in the AFL? Very
hard. I mean, we essentially found out about it pretty much when everybody else did, which was well after that season, 2012, I think. So we spent a lot of time finding out very quickly what had happened. And, it wasn't a pretty sight. So I would have thought, and I think initially the club basically was very cooperative, and but that changed, and I think it became an unfortunate battle, basically.
Can you explain to me what Essendon was guilty of?
Well, I think when you provide, I can't remember how many, but thousands of injections.
Thousands?
Well, apparently. When you go through all the injections that were put through with substances which apparently they weren't too sure what they were.
And are you?
This stage, I've been out of it for 12 months.
But you were in it when this was playing out?
There was certainly... they either didn't know what was in it, or if they did know, they weren't going to say. There was circumstantial evidence as to what it was.
What was your
from our point of view, my point of view was it was almost certainly performance enhancing.
Really?
But even if it wasn't, and the penalty in the end that the AFL put on Essendon was that to do with duty of care and the behaviour towards the players. You
were almost certain that the substances were performance enhancing?
Yeah, you couldn't be totally certain.
No.
Couldn't be totally certain. Talking to one of the opposition players about it, I said, well, what did you think? And he said, we thought they'd done 5 pre-seasons in one. And I think that kind of...
Well, all right, let's accept that. Why then did you not get involved when the West Coast also looked like they'd done 5?
I thought you'd get to that. This is your obsession, Michael.
Well, and rightly so. I think if I could name you 6 or 8 West Coast players from 10 years ago who did have and now have drug problems, that's pretty compelling evidence.
Sure. Evidence of what?
Well, of a drug problem.
Well, a performance-enhancing drug problem or an illicit drug problem?
Well,
because
probably the latter.
Unfortunately, what's happened has been there's been a conflating of the two. And I think the Eagles that year were pretty thoroughly tested for performance enhancing. And they would have been thoroughly tested for illicit as well. And I don't know what the results of the illicit were because they're kept confidential. But in terms of performance enhancing, there were no positives.
Are they kept confidential from the Commission?
Yep.
Are they?
Yep.
Well, how do you implement your
Because
your
it's
drug
done.
code?
It's done on the medical side. It's not something that, I mean, in the end we'll find out if in the end there's a penalty to be applied. It'll come through, but otherwise it won't.
Do you think that the AFL should feel a level of embarrassment about what was happening at West Coast 10 years ago?
Well, are we supposed to post up an individual, the AFL post up an individual at each club to sort of look at what they're doing?
No, but you're supposed to police the drug code.
Yes.
And clearly the illicit drug code and maybe the performance enhancing drug code was breached.
Well, the performance enhancing clearly wasn't.
When the Ben Cousins issue broke, what was your feeling then?
Well, I think, everybody was just disappointed. And in the end, it led to him being out of the game for a year. And the club, we spent a lot of time with the club and essentially put them on notice that unless they changed the way they were dealing with the issue, we'd have to intervene. And fortunately, over 12 months, I think they did clean it up. But it took it took the 12 months and some of the damage had already been done.
So you knew there was a broader problem than just Ben Cousins?
We became aware there was, yes.
How?
Yep. Just going back in time, Michael.
Do you want me to go back on the field?
But let's be clear about Ben. Like, my understanding was Ben started taking drugs when he was 16. This isn't to do with footy. It's not to do with the Eagles. It's to do with the culture that he was involved in. Got to the Eagles. Now, whether the Eagles were using or not, had illicit drugs. What we do know overall is that AFL footballers, relative to their cohort of similar age, use less illicit drugs than that cohort does. So whether it's to do with the illicit code or whether it's to do with discipline involved in the club and the need to keep off illicit drugs to perform, we think the treatment's been relatively successful.
Adam Goods, to me, seems to be lost to the game. Whether it's long-term or temporary, I'm not sure. But I think it's a reasonable conclusion to draw. Did the Commission, should the Commission feel any degree of culpability for that?
I think these sort of issues are always difficult. The booing was something that Adam was enduring was something that ran for a while, but wasn't really obvious until the Eagles game. But certainly not to us. And I know Gil was dealing with it and was in touch with the Swans to try and work out and I think the Eagles game was the first time it got out of hand. And we had a meeting commission meeting on the Tuesday and put out a statement condemning it, which I think was deemed not to be strong enough. And I think it was meant to be strong. So somehow we sort of didn't quite get, I think, the Commission's view across, which was a pity. And it seemed to set up a sort of line we couldn't cross, where I think the Swans and Adam were somewhat angry about the whole thing. And I think it'd be a real pity if he's lost to the game, because he's obviously dual Brownlow medalist, premiership player,
Australian of the Year.
Australian of the Year.
Yep.
And I think he's got a lot out of footy, to be frank. And we've obviously worked hard to. And while I'm not sure what's happened the last 12 months, of course, but we worked hard to try and sort things out. And to be frank, they weren't sorted out when I left. But I think in time he'll come back.
What do you think of the game as it's played in 2018?
Look, it's incredibly competitive and tough and dense. And
Good word, dense.
It's dense, and it's difficult to get the ball away. The tackling's hard. The modern player is braver than we were, without doubt. Commitment to the footy is just terrific. I think they're more skilled. Given time, they're deadly accurate with their feet and with their hands.
You can't leave that.
Well,
are you saying that...
with given time, if they've got time and space, their skills are much better than ours were. Probably the only apparent exception would be shooting for goal. And part of that I put down to the fact that by the time they get the ball, they're exhausted. You know, they've run, 200 metres to get there. They mark the ball 30 metres out, they're stuffed.
Fitzy, gambling's a vexed question in football. We know, and you will know too, lots of players have a gambling problem. Yet the AFL clubs, I think certainly the overwhelming majority of them, still have poker machines. What's your view about that?
Look, it's been there for a long time now. We did, some 7 or 8 years ago, make a real effort to buy them out.
It isn't a good look, is it?
They have a lot of financial advantages in terms of offsetting the volatility, the financial volatility the clubs have, depending on where they are on the ladder.
I'm talking about a moral issue.
Exactly. We're part of the community and it's not a positive aspect of the community.
Okay. As good as you were as a player, you'll be sad to know that you're probably best remembered for a decision at Princess Park one day when Carlton were playing Essendon and you were trying to milk the clock and umpire Ian Robinson took the ball off you. 1981?
81.
Yeah. You marked it at centre-half back, a typical Fitzpatrick mark.
Playing with a broken hand.
Where?
Yep.
Yeah. So you mark the ball, you go back to take your kick.
Yep.
How long do you reckon you had the ball for?
I think it was well into the half a minute or so. It was certainly a long time.
So Robinson then should have said play on, but in fact took the ball off you, didn't he?
He did. I was waiting for the play on call, and he just took the ball off me. And my first thought was, I'm going to kick this over the grandstand, which would have been another 15 metres in those days. But he probably would have made it 50.
And
he was inventive, Robbo.
He was.
He was inventive.
You didn't seem to be sort of taken aback by the decision to rob you of the...
I was very, very, very angry about it.
Well, you would have been when the Bombers won by 1 point.
That too.
Yeah.
But at the time, you're waiting for the call and you get a totally different, an invented rule.
Yeah. Fitzy, it's been a life well lived. I know it's not over, but
I hope not.
but your contribution on the field and subsequently in your various roles has made a huge impact on AFL, Australian football, and good luck for whatever's in front.
Thanks very much, Michael.